What are the top 10 problems with mass vaccination that we might have encountered? My name is Dr. Mikola Rashek of Genomics. Let's get going. This is a bit of an unusual video than what I normally do, is because typically I make videos based on published literature. This one is not. This is basically observational video, my own thoughts about what were the mistakes we might have made. Now, remember, this is not a condemnation of anyone. The mistakes are always made whenever mass programs, especially such as global mass intervention, as what we have attempted this time around, when such massive events take place, mistakes will always be made. That's normal. The reason why I want to make this video is to simply bring attention to what these mistakes might have been, so that we could avoid these in the future as well. All right, number one is ignoring natural immunity. This is the most bizarre one for me, and the reason why is because we literally ignored decades, if not centuries, of our knowledge. And basically, when the mass vaccination program started, we literally were telling everyone to vaccinate, whether they were already infected in the past or not, whereas we know that natural infection is the best form of vaccination, provided that, of course, you survive the natural infection. So this is not to say you should aim for natural infection instead of vaccination, but if you were already naturally infected and you survived, you should no longer need vaccination, and we completely ignore that. And we're basically forcing people to vaccinate because of the risk of losing their livelihood. And why that is a problem? Because, of course, vaccines on their own can also carry certain risks as well. So it was unnecessary additional risk that we're forcing on people. So that, to me, that's the most egregious mistake we've made. Number two, and by the way, this top 10 list is what I believe is number one is the biggest problem, and number 10 would be the least problem. Let me know in the comments if you would have made that order any different, or if you would have added something else to that list that I am not mentioning myself, okay? Number two is using non-sterilizing vaccines in the midst of pandemic. What does that mean? Sterilizing vaccines are the type of vaccines that if you take the shot, you will no longer be infected. It protects you permanently, if you will. Now, these are not easy to attain. Those are not very common type of vaccines. And the reason why it's a problem, potential problem, using such non-sterilizing vaccines in the midst of pandemic is because it could elicit virus evolution, so that the vaccine itself could induce virus evolution. And this is exactly what happened. We put certain immunological pressure on a virus so that the virus ended up evolving. We ended up seeing many different variants, including Omicron, which completely escaped the ability of vaccines to protect from infection. And in the end, the virus evolved to be more infectious, and we ended up having way more people getting infected than we otherwise might have observed. And of course, infection itself carries its own risk as well. So we potentially unnecessarily increase the likelihood of risk if we simply elected to either go with obtaining natural herd immunity, or using vaccination program differently. And I'll get to that as well. But that would be my second biggest mistake we've done, is that we considered using non-sterilizing vaccines in the midst of pandemic, where the warnings were there that we might, as a consequence, see immune escape, and that's exactly what we've observed. All right, number three, this is the big one as well, and that's basically not informing people, not warning people about the risks of getting infected soon post-vaccination. So, in other words, when people were taking the shot, it would have been potentially wise to inform them, hey, maybe even do something like a quarantine to reduce the likelihood of being infected immediately post-vaccination. Why is that? Why is that? Well, it's because, remember, of course, when you're getting immunized with a vaccine, your body has to react to this. Your body is responding. Your immune system is being triggered into specific response as well. And it's going to be weakened in that particular moment. And we already know that COVID-19 infection post-vaccination, immediately post-vaccination, when you are in that weakened state, could be very dangerous. Could be dangerous in practically a lot of problems that we have observed with people post-vaccination, whether it was death or adverse events, had to do with the fact that people ended up simply getting infected, getting COVID-19. And if we simply warned people, hey, listen, this is a potential risk, you need to watch out for this, then perhaps people would have paid greater attention to what they're doing so that they would minimize this risk, and therefore we would have just simply reduced the unnecessary risks that people experienced because of infection soon after COVID-19, after vaccination. And I remember seeing this data in the province where I'm from, Alberta, Canada, and Alberta Health Services used to publish that information. And I remember seeing this, that the biggest issues in terms of infection and mortality post-vaccination was within short time period was about 2 weeks, within 2 weeks. So I think that was our big mistake as well, is that those who were taking a shot were not warned, listen, watch out, take good care, and maybe even quarantine immediately post-shot, so that your body can simply finally then have time to respond and have time to basically your immune system to be strengthened so that you're all good and safe. Number 4 is not using antivirals in conjunction with vaccination. As I just mentioned, one of the biggest risks post-vaccination and probably large segment of issues we might have been observed in people due to vaccines is because of the infection after vaccination. Well, use of antivirals could have prevented that. Instead, bizarrely, and this is really makes no sense to me, didn't make sense to me back then, still doesn't make sense to me. Instead, the media went into some crazy campaign to smear antivirals, to belittle antivirals, to make fun of anyone who would even talk about use of antivirals, including, probably you've heard of it, the smear campaign against the use of ivermectin, which was was another antiviral as well. But that's not the only antiviral we could have used. So using antivirals in conjunction with vaccine could have been potentially a powerful tool, or even using antivirals in general for the population to reduce the risk and increase the likelihood of survival post-natural infection. All right, so let's keep going. Number 5, and I hope I remember this order correctly. Number 5 would have been vaccinating in peak waves of infection. So of course, as we all know, virus, when we've seen these waves of infections, right? We've seen many of these. We expected to see only a few. We ended up seeing many of these. There's a giant snail shells by my feet. I have to be careful. I don't want to step on these. And it relates to what I was just saying a moment ago. Big factors to reduce the likelihood of getting COVID-19 post-vac immediately or soon after vaccination. So once again, logically, you do not want to be vaccinating when we have a peak of infection, meaning where the likelihood of being infected is so high. Ironically, our mass vaccination program with COVID-19 started in, I believe it was December 2020, and that was actually during a big wave. So we were paying attention. Basically, there were no rules. We're simply like, everyone get vaccinated as fast as possible. It didn't matter when. And it might have been much smarter to pay attention whether we were vaccinated in a peak wave of infection, and at that point we should not have. Wait literally 2-3 weeks later and vaccinate where the wave was gone and the likelihood of being infected would have been reduced. Once again, we could have potentially been saving people from serious problems. All right, so those are the big ones. Next one, that's an interesting one. Not paying attention whether the vaccination was injected into bloodstream or not. And this is important because we now know that spike protein can be dangerous, and you would not necessarily want it to be injected into the circulation. Ideally, the goal is to put it into the muscle. That was the goal, but we were so gung-ho to vaccinate as many people as possible that really there was not much attention being paid how vaccines were being injected. As a consequence, likely many people had the vaccines when injected, could have put the vaccination being injected right into the bloodstream, and that means the vaccine vehicle is then circulating in the blood. Why is that dangerous? Of course, well, think of it even in the simplest term. The moment that any cells that will uptake the vaccine, eventually that's such a cell, and that could include the bloodstream walls of the bloodstream vessels. Such cells are then in the risk of being destroyed by the immune system, right? So you can see how that could be a potential issue. And we could have produced some unwanted, unnecessary side effects simply because we didn't pay attention to that simple fact of how do we provide these injections. All right, we're getting to the last few. Let's see if I can remember them. We did 6. Let's do number 7. Number 7, I think the next one is how many people we've actually injected with. I think and basically what I mean by that is that we injected too many people as opposed to only high-risk individuals. So remember, the big problem is that we were using non-sterilizing vaccines. So if they're non-sterilizing, it means that vaccines run the risk of inducing immune escape, and as a consequence, well, obviously that's a problem. So what do? Normally in natural infection, where you create herd immunity, it's only portion of the population that becomes infected, and the rest de facto remain what we would call basically uninfected, unvaccinated individuals, and it's their own natural immunity, innate immunity, that protects in conjunction with those who have been infected. Together they create a protection so that basically eventually that reduces the likelihood of being infected, meaning you only need to have portion of the population infected. Likewise, if you were to be using non-sterilizing vaccines, potentially the problem is that we injected too many people as opposed to simply focusing on high-risk population. What that means is that I suspect that at one point during mass vaccination program, we might have actually achieved herd immunity, because when we first started mass vaccination, we were vaccinating only people working in hospitals and elderly. So very tiny fragment of population. That might have been enough not to put enough pressure on the population, on the virus, by the population, for the virus to start evolving. And this way we potentially might have actually created herd immunity. So that could have been another issue. Next, number 8. Number 8 is not investigating the potential dangers of selected antigen. In this case, the antigen that we selected was a spike protein, and we just went with the assumption that it's safe to use as is. Now we know that spike protein is in its own right potentially dangerous. So recall I've done this series where I discussed how the spike protein is involved in formation of unusual clots. That's just one way of how spike protein has subsequently emerged to be dangerous. Another one is just simply how much of an antigen we've used. And that brings me to the next point. I believe, I lost my count. Is that going to be 8 or 9? I think it's number 9. But basically, whether we have used the entire antigen or we should have used only a fragment of an antigen. When we did the mass vaccination program, we did it with an entire antigen, meaning we used entire spike protein, and incredibly, we even left the furin cleavage site intact, meaning we left the spike protein that we were vaccinating with free to still be cleaved by our body into fragments without even knowing what these fragments might be doing as well to our body, which is still to some degree unknown. There is some information that they themselves might provide certain risk, but that just goes to show you that we did not truly investigate properly to the degree that the antigen we selected might have been dangerous. And there were calls at the early stages of the pandemic that perhaps we should have only used tiny fragment of the spike protein, just a receptor binding domain. Basically, the part of the spike protein that is used to interact with the ACE2 receptor. And that might have been another mistake, was that we should have only used a tiny fragment just to pinpoint and tell the antibody, hey, if we're not getting naturally infected, maybe just produce antibodies against the most targeted part of the spike protein that we want to be targeting with our immune system. And well, I hope I didn't lose count, but the last one on my list was the concept that we did not consider using other vaccines in order to protect against COVID-19. So that means we did not necessarily need anti-SARS-CoV-2 virus vaccine. We did not need those COVID-19 vaccines. We could have also used other vaccines in order to help protecting us. Recall there was this discussion, or at least, I don't know to what degree people might have heard this, there were definitely observations that certain other non-related vaccines were providing protection against COVID-19 infection. And indeed, we do know that live vaccines can provide non-specific benefits from other respiratory infections. So that's something that also could have been considered prior to embarking on mass vaccination with completely new technology, where we didn't even have enough time to truly inspect whether that technology was ultimately as safe as we want it to be, typically in such a mass vaccination program that we have undertaken. So basically, here's I think it's my top 10 list, maybe it's top 9 list, but I hope I got all 10 points. And basically, let me know whether you agree or not. But the purpose of this list is, as I mentioned, for us to ponder what mistakes might have been made so that we do not make them in the future. Of course, this is just to stimulate the thought, stimulate discussion among scientists as well. And that's in general, we need that because, of course, medicine always has to improve. The fact that we make mistakes is normal. That doesn't surprise me. I just shrug it off. Making mistakes in medicine to me is normal. That's just basically how we also improve medicine. But we need to also acknowledge that mistakes do happen and improve them so that medicine can continuously get better. If you think there's something else should have been included in there, let me know, or if you would have changed that order. And as always, please subscribe to the channel. Please share the video. Please check out our Patreon account as well, and account because you can support us in that way as well. And I just want to say thank you for all of your support. All right, folks, I look forward to seeing you in a future installment. Bye, everyone. Ciao.